From theheart.org, Medscape Cardiology. This is the Bob Harrington Show. Dr. Robert Harrington is the Arthur L. Professor and Chair of Medicine at Stanford University. This podcast is intended for healthcare professionals only. Any views expressed are the presenter's own and do not necessarily reflect the views of WebMD or Medscape.
Hi, this is Bob Harrington from Stanford University on Medscape Cardiology and theheart.org. Thanks for joining us in these podcasts. We've been moving to a video format over the course of the pandemic. Throughout the pandemic, we've talked about a lot of important issues facing cardiovascular medicine. We've talked about the science of COVID. We've talked about cardiovascular risk amongst COVID patients. We've talked about a variety of things that affect more broadly, I'll call it healthcare and society, including the fact that COVID has really laid bare to us over the last few years the issues of vulnerable populations being most adversely affected by COVID. That really opens up the broader conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion in medicine, and specifically in cardiovascular medicine. Cardiovascular medicine is not a diverse professional field, but there's a lot of work underway by a variety of groups to try to address some of those issues. Maybe the group that foremost is leading some of those issues around the workforce is the Association of Black Cardiologists, or the ABC. They've recently done work on and released the results of a diversity scorecard, which is really grading institutions as to how well we're all doing with regard to diversifying our training programs. So we thought this would be a great time to bring in two leaders of American cardiology and two leaders within the ABC to have this conversation with us. So it's really a privilege to be able to introduce two close friends and close colleagues, coincidentally, both here in the Bay Area with us. First, to have this conversation, first up is Dr. Michelle Elbert. Michelle is the Walter A. Haas and Lucy Stern Endowed Chair in Cardiology. She is a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. She is the director of the Nurture Center, a research-oriented institute at UCSF, and she is the Dean of Admissions. Michelle is the recent past president of the ABC, and she is the incoming or president-elect of the American Heart Association. So Michelle, Dr. Elbert, thanks for joining us here on theheart.org.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington, Bob. It is indeed an honor to be here to discuss this really, really important topic in the scorecard.
We look forward to hearing about it and also your views on it. Next up is my good friend and colleague here at Stanford, Dr. Eldrin Lewis. Eldrin is the Simon Sturzer Professor of Medicine and the Chief of the Cardiovascular Medicine Division here at Stanford University. Eldrin is also the Chair of the Research Committee at the Association of Black Cardiologists. Eldrin, thanks for joining us here on theheart.org.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I'm really excited to be a part of this as well. Thank you for inviting me.
Before we jump into the topic at hand, which is really to focus on the scorecard and what that means and what you found and what we can all do about it, Michelle, let's start with you. And can you frame for the audience the importance of thinking about a diverse workforce as we think about clinical care, education, research, all the things that that academic medical centers really should be focused on?
Thanks, Bob. It's critically important now more than ever, given, as you highlighted, with the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, especially African American, Hispanic American, and Native American communities, as well as lower socioeconomic status communities, that we have a diverse workforce that addresses the unmet needs. We've certainly seen improvements in technology and in drug therapy, clinical trials over the last 3 decades. But the effects of those improvements in cardiovascular medicine have not translated into decreases in life expectancy, an improvement in disability for especially communities of color, specifically Black communities and Hispanic communities. Why is this the case? This is in part the case because we don't have the workforce that can actually really communicate effectively with those communities and also design research and clinical trials that actually incorporate elements that are important for addressing the disparities. We also don't have diversity in clinical trial participants. We don't have diversity in investigators. And this investigator part is particularly important as we think about the workforce. As Dean of Admissions of UCSF School of Medicine, I know that despite over the last 30 years, there has been actually a decrease in the number of Hispanics, for example, Native Americans, 30% decrease in the number of Native Americans applying to medical school. The increase in African Americans has only gone up by like 1.2%. And this is despite an increase in applications to medical school in general. And that's at the medical school level. That's not talking about the deep pipeline that actually feeds into medical school, which is so critically important. And then this all has a reverberating effect to residency, to cardiovascular fellowship, not being able to have the clinicians and the researchers who can actually bond and gain trust from the communities that need to be in clinical trials that then relate to what we see in terms of disparities in healthcare. So from the ABC perspective, the ABC has been an organization that's been in existence for 50 years and actually was founded on the principle of taking care of and focusing on the needs of a diverse America, especially of African Americans. And so during my presidency, which took place in these last 2 years, it was really important from a strategic standpoint for me to usher in programs that focused on workforce.
Very nicely giving us the overview, Michelle, of the importance of this. Eldrin, you're a cardiology chief. That means you're helping select trainees for fellowship spots, postdoctoral research spots. You're also hiring faculty at all levels, assistant professors up through professors. Let's start with, how do you think about the workforce? It's sort of like you've got to assemble a team. And how do you think philosophically about assembling that team? What are you thinking about in terms of the kind of fellows you want, the kind of postdoctoral research, postdoctoral graduates that you want? Who are you looking for?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bob. And I would first of all, echo what Michelle has said about the importance of the pipeline, and then just add that I'm actually looking for excellence. So excellent across the board. And that excellence is in clinical care delivery, in advocacy for our patients, but also to help in the national landscape with policy development, research, and really kind of meeting patients where they are. So part of that is kind of meeting the diverse needs of our patients. There are many patients who really want doctors who look like them, and they want to have a better understanding of how we can kind of use those similar cultural backgrounds and apply it to trying to change behavior for secondary prevention and primary prevention and even primordial prevention efforts. But with this, we realize that one of the best ways to recruit a diverse workforce with regards to scientists and cardiologists will be to actually develop the workforce yourself. So it's so important to have not only a wide variety to choose from with regards to people who've already completed their internal medicine residency and they're applying to fellowship, but to also have a diversity of interest. So just because someone comes from a racial, from underrepresented racial or ethnic group doesn't necessarily mean that they're interested in doing disparities research, which is, it's so important. We want basic scientists, translational scientists, population scientists, addressing what they want. And so my job and my role as Chief of Cardiovascular Medicine is to ensure that whatever the interests are will be met and that there will be a fertile environment for them to get the training. Part of that training is to actually get a good cadre of mentors and a mentorship team who can not only mentor but sponsor so that we can shepherd people through the process. And what better way of doing that by really working hard to have a very diverse fellowship program, and then actually provide them with the tools necessary to not only understand what they want to accomplish in their academic and their clinical career, but also to provide the ability for themselves to become the future mentors across the spectrum of people who are in the training pipeline.
Michelle, Eldrin said something that I think is, I want to highlight because I think it's so important. He said that patients sometimes, maybe even all the time, they like to engage with clinicians that look like them. And there's some important work that's been done in things like the barbershop studies, that when you have a community of caregivers who, in fact, reflect the community, the care is better. Do you want to touch upon that? Because we're not just saying that this is a good thing to do. This is evidence-based.
No, and I think that's really, really important. And there's several things there that I want to touch on around that issue. So the first is that we know that, just as a personal anecdote, I'll say, many patients will reach out to the cardiovascular clinic at UCSF and say, hey, I want to see Dr. Albert. And then when I meet with them, they specifically chose me because I happen to be African American and I happen to be an African American woman. And they feel that this is going to offer them the opportunity to be able to express their lived experience in a way that they feel that they have not been able to. And usually they're very grateful thereafter. So just from a personal perspective, I think that, I know that, and that's been my lived experience. Now, moving to the evidence-based aspect of this, we know that studies like, for example, there was a study that was done in Florida looking at babies born and the racial concordance of the babies born with the providers and the outcomes related to the perinatal outcomes for those babies. And the perinatal outcomes were improved for those babies who had clinical concordance with the provider. And this is not the mother, this is the child. Similarly, I think the barbershop study that you mentioned is very important in that regard because it brings in a social determinant of health, brings in another part of the healthcare team, pharmacists, and it meets people where they are. Right? And all of those elements put together really engender more trust, more uptake and adherence of recommendations. So this concordance or certainly competence or understanding how discrimination is baked into our medical systems and structure is important to understand as we have therapeutic relationships with patients. This doesn't mean that our wide swath of our beautiful spectrum of race and ethnicity in the world, that you can't take care of a person of color if you're not a person of color. It's really, sort of understanding that the issue of diversity is important. And Eldrin mentioned diversity in thought, as well as, sort of diversity as it relates to lived experience. So I think those things are all important. The other thing that Eldrin touched on that I wanted to pivot back on too as well is, when we're recruiting for fellowship or for the medical school, one of the things I say in the opening when I'm talking to the applicants is, look, we are looking for doctors who are, again, going to address the most pressing issues that face us over time. We can't anticipate what those are. We know what some of those are right now. And what that then means is that we need to recruit people who are going to be exceptional across the spectrum of medicine.
Yeah, what I particularly like that both of you brought up is this issue of trust. And there's a deep literature now that's very much in favor of this notion that trust is such an important part of the clinician-patient relationship. And people do better when they trust who it is that's taking care of them. We have data that supports that. Eldrin, now let's get to the ABC work in this area. Certainly, one of the things that ABC is interested in is diversifying the workforce, and the cardiology workforce. Yes, it starts in a very early pipeline. I always love the pictures of Quinn Capers doing white coat ceremonies for kindergartners in Columbus, Ohio. But that's not what you're doing, Eldrin. You're picking cardiology fellows. And the ABC has started to quantify how we're all doing as institutions, those of us that have training programs. Talk to us about the project, and then maybe Michelle can give us at least an insight into some of the data, including, let's put both the UCSF and the Stanford data out there and talk about it. So go ahead, Eldrin. Why don't you tell us the genesis of the project?
Right. No, absolutely. And I would love Michelle's commentary as well. I think it really is to kind of look at a snapshot and say, where are we? And understanding that this is a snapshot year over year, and it certainly can change, especially when you have relatively small numbers. But the concept is, if you don't look at something, then you won't necessarily know when there needs to be a change and when we need to emphasize it. So the example that I would bring up disparities research again. So for decades, we've said, okay, there are disparities, racial disparities, gender or sex disparities, and it's characterized. However, what we don't do enough is to emphasize, here are the things that we can do to change. So these are the things that work, these are the things that don't. So if you don't characterize it, then you don't kind of look for it. So if you, with the scorecard, for those institutions that have 20% or higher kind of representation from a racially ethnic group among the fellows, for basically Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latinx, et cetera, would be in the green category. Then you would have the yellow category for 10 to 19%, and less than 10% would be in the red. And I would say, when this data came out, Michelle and I are very close friends, and it hurt me that we were in the 10 to 19%. And I know that if we were to look today, we would be in the green, but it was a snapshot at the time. So what it means is we need to really be purposeful. And recruiting is not something that we can just say, we'll just recruit agnostically. We have to look specifically at who the makeup of the fellowship program will be. And the example that I would use I didn't include race is, if I were to look at all of our 7 fellows coming in and all 7 wanted to become interventional cardiologists, basic scientists, I would say, okay, I need to make sure I find a place for all 7 people who are coming in. So you want to look for diversity of interest. But also, I think it's really important to be a truly vibrant kind of fellowship training program. You want to make sure that you have diversity across all lenses, both racial and ethnic diversity, as well as gender or sex-based diversity. So I'm really excited for what we've done, and the fact that for the next iterations, we will be in the green.
Not that you're competitive, Eldrin.
Not at all.
So, Michelle, give us the snapshot of the U.S. when the ABC released these results recently, for example.
Yeah, so I want to backtrack a little bit about the scorecard. The scorecard is called the Association of Black Cardiologists Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Scorecard, the ABC DIB scorecard. And there was a 10-member committee that actually worked to pull this together. And it is actually a new spin on an older version of this that the ABC did about 15, 20 years ago, when, for example, there was an institution that had never recruited any African Americans to their program since their inception. And what it resulted in was that institution became one of the most diverse institutions across the U.S. So the importance of, sort of really, putting something out there so that people can see it, and it acts as a real motivator, because we all know that there are problems in programs, but it doesn't mean necessarily that programs will make an effort to do it. The other point I want to make about the scorecard is that it actually was really difficult to actually garner the information to put together on the scorecard, because we contacted 42 programs based on the top 20 programs in the U.S. and other geographically and also to get geographic diversity. And it took a lot of effort to actually get this information. And the official sources from which you can get this information actually said they would give the information, 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 and we never really got it. Okay, so we ultimately got information from 29 programs, mostly from program directors. And I think this is a very important part of this discussion because this is how we perpetuate structural discrimination and racism if we're not able to actually put our laundry out there. And what was nice about what Eldrin just said is that he knows where Stanford is on this list. But using it as a growth opportunity, as a growth mindset, I think is really important. So I really needed to say that part. And I think the other part I need to say, and Bob, I may have even forgotten your question by now, but the scorecard was intended to capture the number of Black and Hispanic trainees and faculty across the programs that I already mentioned, as well as the level of the faculty, because the faculty become an important part of this too. We have not published the faculty data yet. We're going to do that in the next rendition. And I think it's also important to actually highlight which programs were in the green. I'm hoping that you're going to put it on your Medscape program, but Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital, Boston Medical Center, Brigham and Women's Hospital, Duke University Hospital, University of Pennsylvania, Mass General Hospital, Morehouse School of Medicine, which is a predominantly historically Black college and university, UCSF, my home institution, University of Florida, Jacksonville, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and Vanderbilt University Medical Center. I think it's important to state that and put that in the program because those programs need to be commended. And then the programs who are in transition, this is not a shaming document. This is just, I want to congratulate all the programs who actually submitted data, because being vulnerable enough to submit data really means that you really care about this issue, right? So to be in the red, okay, in this document, it's important that, you're in the red, but also you put yourself out there and make yourself vulnerable that you're in the red. Is also something that we are very appreciative of at the Association of Black Cardiologists.
You did answer my question, and thank you for listing the sites that were in the green. And I think getting back to Eldrin's point, these are outstanding cardiovascular medicine training programs, no matter how you look at it. And so it's fantastic that they're committed not to this aspect of excellence along with other measures of excellence. And I would agree with both of you, which I think you're implying is that similar to quality improvement work, you first have to measure things and then you have to report on it and then you have to come up with a plan of action. And I know that I just really enjoyed how you stated that, Michelle. This is an opportunity for all of us that lead residency programs, fellowship programs to get better at what we do. As we move into our last few minutes, I want to give each of you a minute or so to say, what else can we do to make cardiology a welcoming place for people of all backgrounds? Cardiology is, Michelle, one of the things I know Michelle talks about a lot is the intersectionality of things like being Black and a woman. And so let's put it out there. Cardiology's been working hard at trying to increase the number of women in cardiology. We're working hard to increase the number of Black cardiologists, Hispanic cardiologists, from other underrepresented groups. Eldrin, what can we do in addition to measuring, reporting, and getting us consciously thinking about this? Give me a tangible example of what we can do. And then I'm going to ask you the same question, Michelle.
Absolutely. I think we have to break down the misperceptions. So if you ask, I'm not going to just focus on racial and ethnic diversity, but also gender diversity. When we're looking at 15% of the workforce in cardiology being women, a lot of times when I talk to medical students and try to encourage them to go into cardiology, they're like, I don't like the work-life balance. And I often will say it really comes down, there are so many things to do within cardiology. So the misperception that it's hard, that it's not an area where I can thrive. I think that has to be broken down. And I think the second, and the reason it's so important to have such a diverse workforce, is there's nothing better than to look at someone who has a similar background, a similar upbringing, and say, I've done it. Let me tell you how life is, and let me tell you how I got to my point, to where I am now. So in addition to breaking down the misperceptions, we have to move upstream. So that includes undergrad, really high school, and we've done high school programs, certainly medical school, to continue to say, this is how you can become a clinician scientist, a clinician educator. Here are the many paths, diverse fabric of kind of how to be a cardiologist and how to succeed.
I love the example you give, Eldon. I talk about the personal narrative can really make a difference. And you and I have participated in some of those AHA high school programs where you meet these amazing young kids. And then you're asking yourself, how can we pull them into cardiology with us? So the personal story, I think, goes a long way. Michelle, what's your example? What can we do? What tangible advice do you want to give to the audience?
Yeah, so I think a few items. First, I think grounded in the principle that we all belong to the human race and that we all hope for the best for our neighbors, our friends, etc. And if you think of a neighbor or a friend who is of a different background to you, I'm sure you wouldn't want anything to happen to them, and you want a workforce that can take care of them. So in that light, starting from that grounding, I think one of the things that we need to do is to actually transform our educational and training modules. Right now, medicine is becoming more diverse. Both 50% of our medical students are women, for example, and certainly at some medical schools, the UIM percentage is upwards of 30 to 50%. What that means then is that the culture of medicine has to change and evolve to be in parallel with what the needs are for those students and trainees. And that's something that we have to do in terms of cleaning our house. And that also gets to deal with that intersectionality issue that you mentioned, Bob, because, as you know, medicine has been traditionally white and male, right? And if medicine is traditionally white and male, and many white men now are concerned that, we're talking about all this diversity and inclusion, et cetera, what about me? That speaks to those persons rolling up their sleeves and joining the transformational movement that's occurring in medicine. And that's a really, really important thing. And then I think finally, there has to be leaders, have to be judged on their mentorship and sponsorship. So one of the things that's really fantastic about you, Bob, is that you have made it part of your life commitment to sponsoring UIM and sponsoring women. Right? We need more leaders like you. So those are some examples that I would say are really, really important to the future, not just about diversity, but it actually is about the future of medicine.
You're way too kind to me, and we'll edit that piece out. But I will say that I do think you're both spot on, that mentorship, sponsorship, allyship, critically important, and the call out there to all leaders to make that part of your own personal scorecard. I want to thank the two of you, Dr. Michelle Albert, Dr. Eldon Lewis from UCSF and Stanford, respectively. The work that you're doing is incredibly important for all of us as we aim to really diversify and make even more excellent our cardiovascular workforce. This has been a terrific conversation. Kudos to the ABC for taking this on, which is hard work, as you've both indicated. We've been talking about diversity scorecards in cardiovascular medicine training programs, and really thanking both of you again for your leadership, and the ABC for its really forward thinking and doing this sort of work. So thanks for listening to us. This is Bob Harrington on Medscape Cardiology and theheart.org.